All right, well, I can see that the meeting is now recorded, so I will unpause my voice here. Hello, thank you for joining us today. I'm Tom Page, and I am the research consultant for DPI, and my primary role as a research consultant is this data collection. And so I'm here today to talk about the data collection, um, the minimal amount of updates that we've actually had for it this year, but to give you a walkthrough of why we collect it, what it is, what you'll need to have near you as you enter this information, and how to successfully submit this information. My email is listed here, as you can see. It will also be at the end of this presentation. We have a division contact slide as well, so you can reach me or the consultants. And at any time, as you have questions about these data collection, not just today, of course, but as you are starting to complete these data, as you're looking to submit them, anything, especially that's technical, centered on data collection or how you might, what we're asking for, how you might answer a certain question, anything like that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. That is my primary role once we get this thing um, rolled out and it's live for the months that you have to complete it. I'm really acting a lot during that time as an IT support on this project. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and so I can get your questions and concerns answered. Let's jump over here. There we go. So the agenda for today, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the House bill itself, um, the data collection introduction, so some of the broad instructions for how to submit these data, who to submit it for, and so on, how that's unveiled to you. Then we'll do a walkthrough on how to complete and submit your survey. So we'll look at some of the sections of the survey, what questions look like, some of the nuances of moving through the online survey. The contact info, again, will be at the end of the slides. And at that time, so if we have any questions, you can put those in the chat and I can address some of those at the end of this talk if they don't come up during my presentation. So largely, I will say if you've done these data collection in previous years, especially if you've done it last year, it's nearly identical aside from one data verification question at the beginning. So you'll be in good hands and happy to know that there's little in the way of changes, and that is also true for the ordering of the items in the survey. So it would be very similar to what you've done in previous years. But of course, we'll need new information on these students. So that's where you get to add the new info, the new changes. So just a brief history on the HB 317 data collection. This is mandated by the State Board of Education, and the goal overall, as I have in red here, is the hopes to improve the educational outcomes for North Carolina children who are deaf or hard of hearing. And a lot of what these data collection and the mandate are centered upon is collecting information about language and literacy. So language that is needed, requisite for individuals to be good pre-readers, successful readers, and to be successful to learn to their potential in this academic environment. And so related to this mandate, that sort of directs us to what we need to collect in these data, and also how we have to store, organize it, and make it available to stakeholders as well. So those sections are sort of highlighted here. So the first section, develop assessment procedures and protocols to measure at least annually or more frequently, if specified in the child's IEP, the acquisition of language skills necessary for literacy using linguistically and culturally appropriate assessment tools. So you'll provide information within the data about what tools you've used, what assessment tools you've used, and the results of those assessments as they pertain to a child from their IEP. This House bill also mandates the use of the communication plan worksheet, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So any child, any student in North Carolina who has a diagnosis of deaf or hard of hearing, IEP, should have a communication plan worksheet. Not all of those students will necessarily be in these data collection, and we'll talk about that in a couple slides. But a lot of the questions that we ask come from the communication plan worksheets. They're either going to be in the communication plan worksheet, part of ECATS, and or in the IEP. So you're going to want to have those resources available to you as you enter these data, answer these questions in the survey, because primarily all the quantitative and some of the qualitative questions are going to be found in the communication plan worksheet and or the IEP. So have those close by as you enter these data. Section 2 states that DPI shall make databases containing information on children under the age of 22 who are diagnosed as deaf or hard of hearing. A part of that is then to develop and maintain a statewide data tracking system. And so we send out these surveys for our students, and you help us by completing, filling in the information for them. So they are in, this information is in one sort of repository. Once that due date passes and you've submitted all your data across the state, we go in and we organize, clean, add that data to an ongoing repository. And then we are able to utilize these data to generate reports back to individual stakeholders like LEAs, as well as to different stakeholders across the state within DPI and DHHS, or the assembly, whoever is requested by. So part of that is getting good data that is robust and that really reflects some of the questions that stakeholders might have as to how students are doing as they learn language, as they become readers, and hopefully successful achievement-wise as well. So while this is a mandated data collection, I think there are some great things that we can do with this. We can see this as an opportunity to better understand, plan, support our students, educators, and related specialists. You know, as I mentioned, the overall goal is to improve outcomes for these children. And I think if we have a really strong understanding of individual characteristics and performance of children, as well as ability, which this data allows, an ability to look at an entire district or to look at a region or statewide, we really can understand some of the nuances that lead to students potentially having success, but also recognize areas maybe of challenge and where we're going to focus some of our efforts to improve those outcomes. Of course, to best make use of these data is to have good data, to have good information. And so to achieve these goals, we need to rely on quality data that is consistent and complete. We've moved to this online data collection probably about 5 years ago. We moved to Qualtrics, and really this has helped improve the validity, both the robustness, and I think also the ease to which these data can be collected, and the confidence in the quality and the consistency of these data, so that we can really put these data to good use and have confidence in the information that, as you can see here, you all help us provide as we rely upon our LEAs, teams within these LEAs, especially in the larger districts, to provide hearing, language, and literacy information that is not available electronically across DPI. So this, we really do seize upon this mandate to provide, to hopefully create a robust look at individual students, their districts, and so on, and centered around assessment as well as characteristics of their hearing. If there's been challenges or concerns, we really do feel like we get a good look at how these students are doing and concerns and challenges and things to address that districts can hopefully utilize themselves and put to good work to recognize what are we doing well, what are some things that potentially we could improve upon, maybe for this particular child or for overall the services that we provide. So let's talk a little bit about the data collection. broad instructions. This data collection is for students with a primary eligibility as deaf or hard of hearing, so exceptionality eligibility codes of DF or HI, and who have an IEP. So the student list is generated by DPI, so it's generated by us, and then we provide that student list to LEAs, to an LEA lead, a lead designated for HB 317. And that student list is generated from the December headcount of the current year. So we start, as I'll mention here, we start to send out links next week. It takes a little while to roll those out, but we start those next week. And those are generated from this past December's headcount. So only students who are in your district in December 23 headcount with a primary eligibility as DF or HI should be on that list. You may have other students who may not have a primary eligibility of DF or HI who have hearing loss in your district, but they will not or should not be on this list. Also, if you've had a student that's moved into your district, but they were not on your December head count, of course, they won't be represented there. If they were in state, they would be represented in the district that they left. And for that reason, you're only responsible for completing those assigned from the list. So in that example where the student potentially moved from one district into another during the school year, the district that had that student in December will be the one responsible for completing information for that student. And then next year, if they stay in that new district would be responsible for it if they're on that December head count then. The due date is similar to what we've done for years now. It's the end of the second week of July. So Friday, July 12th, 2024 will be the last day to submit your data for your students. Highly advised to get started earlier, especially for those larger districts, so that if there's any questions, if there's any hiccups before people leave on summer vacation, whatever it may be, that you have a head start and those things can get in and not rushed so much at the end. So the nice thing too is, as I said, as these are going out next week, it's actually a little bit earlier than we've typically done. So you'll have a longer period of time to enter these data. The student data, as I said, will be primarily found in the student's IEP or the communication plan worksheet. So have those repositories available to you so you can look up this information and then enter it into the online survey. The communication plan worksheet, as I said, is just for any student with hearing loss, but you're going to be responsible only for the ones on your list, and those again are the kids that have primary eligibility as deaf or hard of hearing. As I mentioned, we've used this online survey format for a number of years now. So it really looks like an online survey that you might complete after you finish, checking out from Target Online or some sort of customer experience. It really follows that sort of look in an online survey. It's hosted online by Qualtrics, which is a really robust research survey tool. It's used in business and in education and research. The nice thing about the online format is that we're able to put instructions and details that help clarify what we're asking about or of you for information for a student. So we can put those examples, clarifications right there on the page, close to what we're asking for. Also, the online format allows for sections and questions to be skipped when they don't pertain to a particular student. So we'll often have questions at the beginning of a section that ask, does this student have this or not? And if they do, then it knows, okay, we should ask more about that, collect those pieces of information. If something doesn't apply, know the student does not have vocabulary goals, let's say, or vocabulary delay, then we're not going to ask you for vocabulary assessment results, and that section then could be skipped. So the skip logic, as I call it, is really quite helpful. So you can put together a really robust survey, but only ask the questions that pertain to a particular student. And this format has really helped minimize missing data. A number of the questions you'll be forced to sort of provide a response because they should fit, but the skip logic makes sure that you get questions that do apply to that student. So as we begin to roll out the survey each year, your designated HB317 lead will be provided a document with student information. So it's just a minimal student identifier so we know who the student is. And with that, a individual unique student link. The lead then distributes those links to individuals to complete the data survey. So in some districts, the lead may be the only person that's entering these data for a particular student or all of their students. More often, I think, especially in the larger districts, is this is sort of a shared experience or a shared responsibility, and the lead then distributes that to our SLPs, teachers of hard of hearing, whoever else may be, educational audiologists, whoever else may be helping complete these data. But the lead receives initially and then distributes that. These links, as I said, are tailored particular to a student. So it's not like you start a brand new page and for any student, each link has to tie to a specific student. And in fact, we have a number of pieces of embedded data in the background that make sure that these things are matching up, and that when the survey is submitted, a lot of the things that there's a lot of information already in there that you don't need to complete because we've embedded that. So we got to make sure that our links match the student. And there are some cues to make sure that when you open up a survey that it is the right one for the student. Each of these student links, once you click on that link, it opens it up in your browser. You'll be prompted for a password for your LEA. And so we send to the lead this document of links, and then we send in a separate email at the same time, a password. And just as we shared those in two different documents, two different messages, we ask that if a lead is sharing links to other individuals on their team, that they keep the links and the password separate, just so we have a little bit higher level of security. Being requested that we do that, and that's something that we've done since the launch. So when sharing survey links and a password, please do so in separate emails. One nice thing as well about the online survey format is that it does support multiple users contributing to one student's survey information. So multiple users can complete the survey via the same original link that is provided from your lead. One thing that we do ask that if multiple users are completing a particular student survey, that you don't close the survey when you finish your section if you know that there's more information that's going to be provided, either by you later or by another individual on your team. Let's say an audiologist that may be putting in the pure tone averages and other hearing related info. So if you know multiple individuals are going to be contributing to that survey, and that's obviously going to be done at different times, and just wait until all the information has been entered, and then you can submit that data. What happens if you submit the data is essentially it closes that survey, that link is no longer valid. We have all the information, but you can't click on that link and get back to it. Of course, it's, if that happens, do not worry about it. Send me an email. I can reopen those student surveys, and all your information will still show up. It'll still be there as you had entered it. And I just have to send you a new link. That link is no longer valid. So it's basically just a new link to the same survey that you've completed. So, things do change. Things accidentally get closed. Do not worry about it. But it'll just save you some time and be more efficient if you just leave those open as you enter them. The nice thing about Qualtrics is that it saves as you go. So even if you close your browser and then a week later come back to that same student survey, open it up, the data is still saved there in the cloud. You'll see that data and you can kind of pick up where you left off, or you pick up where your team member left off, however it is that you're doing it. So this happens all the time. Do not fret. Send me an email and we'll get that reopened for you. Okay, I ask that you provide the student's PowerSchool number. That just helps me find the survey a little bit quicker within Qualtrics. If you don't have that readily available, then you can put the student's name in there in a closed email. So don't hesitate to reach out if you need any kind of support. This here is a screenshot sort of my initial view in Qualtrics of the survey. So it doesn't quite look like this to you. This does sort of reflect what the table of contents looks like. But this is showing all of the section of the survey that we've created and have used for the past number of years. You also see here within these sections that there are, this is a robust survey or data collection. There are a lot of questions in here, but no student will have to have answers for all of these questions. With the skip logic, there's more questions in here than would apply to any one student. So this just shows every possible question that's in there, but depending on the student's needs, depending on the data that you have, you may be filling out some of these sections, you may be filling out portions of these sections, or you may be skipping some of these entirely. But there are questions that are there that you answered that let us know to skip forward or not. So the student's data really guides what questions you get. So let's start looking at some screenshots of the data collection. I've used, in this presentation, I've used a number of screenshots from across the year. So you can disregard the question numbers. Some of these things have adjusted slightly and some of these years, but the look and the questions remain the same for the ones that I'm showing you. So in the top left of the screen, once you've entered into a student survey, you'll see these 3 lines, and that's a button that you can click on, and it pulls down the table of contents as you see are kind of listed here. The nice thing about the table of contents as a reference tool is it provides the completion status for the student survey, so you get a sense for how far into a section you are. Some of them are very short, some are a little bit more longer when you're entering, receptive assessment data, expressive assessment data, composite, so some sections are longer, but you get a nice idea of sort of how far you are within that for each section. Once you've completed one of those sections, the questions have all been answered, you'll get a check mark, and that lets you know that that's completed. And you can also use the table of contents to click on different sections to jump ahead. So if you came into a survey and a teammate of yours has been working in communication support, but you're just there to enter in the hearing assistive technology, you could click on that and start in there, okay? So this is what it looks like before you click it. When you click it, it sort of drops down and you can see that table of contents. One thing I do want to tell you about is that most of the responses, so most of the questions have some sort of a forced response. So if the question is in there and you're being asked it, we almost always expect that there is some sort of answer that you can provide for a student. And so two things will typically happen if you try to skip to another section, but you haven't answered the question on that page, or if you go to the next page and there's something that's been left unanswered, you'll either get a reminder prompt that says, oh, hey, could you, you have some unanswered questions on this page. Would you like to move forward anyway? Yes or no. That's where, a response is being requested. Hey, you may have accidentally skipped this. Just want to let you know that you haven't answered something on there. So that pops up. But then there are also a number of items where a response is needed, and you'll get more of this sort of error, not error, but alert. Please answer this question. So it's, if you've gotten to this page, typically there's going to be something that you can provide regarding that student. So the question should apply to that student. And this is really here, even though it can be a little bit cumbersome, these response needed prompts really have helped us minimize any missing data. So accidentally skipping whole sections or accidentally skipping a question or pages, they can be sometimes feel as a nuisance, but those alerts are there to let you know, oh, this needs to be answered. And that way we don't have sections that are missed. And this is really something that's kind of easy to do when you have multiple team members entering information on a particular student. It just ensures that everything has been completed and all the information has been entered. So there's some of those examples. Just a little bit farther, back, I guess we're zoomed out a little bit in this shot, so you can kind of get an idea of what the table of contents looks like. You have, these direction bars, so you can go back. If you click on the left arrow, If you're clicking on the arrow on the right, it'll move you forward to the next screen, and you get an overall estimate of how far you are through the survey for the student. You can also sort of visually see it by section here too. Okay, so this is one where we just jumped right to the hearing info and audiogram info, and none of these other ones have been completed. One thing, as I mentioned too, is that Qualtrics does save your work. If you have not entered anything on a particular page and you go to click back or go to the next page, you will get this prompt to say, yeah, you can go back, but there's nothing that's been entered on this page. Now, if you have, let's say, checked on one of these items and you close or you go to the next page, that information is saved. If there is never any concern that it's not going to be saved, you'll get some sort of prompt that lets you know that it won't be saved. But generally, once you've checked on an answer, it starts to sort of hard file it in the cloud for you. So I mentioned there was really only one addition to this year's data collection, and it's really more of a housekeeping verification type question. So this happens quite early, as you can see, question 1.3. This happens quite early in this year's survey, but for verification purposes, please answer the following two items. What is the student's last name? That would go here. What school does this student attend? And then the school name. And this does two things. For us on our side, it lets us know that, okay, this person entered information for the student link that we sent. Remember, these are tailored links, so they are unique for each student. And this just makes sure that we have that information lining up. And on your side, it also just ensures that as you start the survey, that you are entering the information for the student that you think you are. So if you clicked on a link for so-and-so's name, you enter it here, you make sure you have that information in front of you that you're pulling from in eCats, and that you're all on the same page, because we've had a number of individuals who've entered other students' information into the wrong survey. And this, I think, is just another quick safety check to make sure that we're all on the same page, so to speak, and verifying that this is the right student, the right information. So at the beginning, you'll get some questions about the student's status, whether they're inactive or inactive during this school year. Again, just disregard these older dates, but the questions are the same with new dates now. But we ask you right near the beginning, did this student complete the entire school year in your LEA? If you say yes, then it just moves on past. You wouldn't get any of these other questions that you see here. It'll sort of get started into actually starting collecting information about that student. But if you say no, we want to know why the student was not in your LEA for the entire school year. You know, what in their status has changed? Did they move? Did they drop out? Did they graduate? What happened over the course of the year? And so you would answer that. There's a long drop down. You know, you're not seeing everything here for, you know, it's just space purposes, but there's a long list of things you can choose from. There's also an other option at the bottom with a text box you can fill in if none of these apply. And then we also ask you, even though that student is currently not enrolled in your LEA or their status changed, do you have any information about the student that can be included in this data collection? And so even if you have some assessment data from earlier in the year, some updated information about the student, their hearing, their technology, any challenges or concerns that you had, we would like you to share those, even though they had a change in status. If you say yes, then it'll sort of move on into the survey as it would for any other student. But if you do not have any information, any updated information, anything that you can report or share about the student for this school year, then you would check no, and that would then prompt up, basically, we're about to close the survey option. So if there's no data to report, then you don't need to go through the entire survey, we feel, right? There's no point. So let's go ahead and acknowledge that you do not have information for the student, that they had some sort of change in their status, and then you will close and that will submit the survey to us as done. So any student on your list, whether you have information to share or you do not have information to share, we need to know that. So even if you recognize a name or two in your list, they moved away, you don't have information, please click into that link and at least go through these first few, 3 or 4 questions and submit that survey. So we hope that every survey link that we send out gets submitted, whether there's it's full of information and data or whether there is virtually none. So I have some screenshots from a physical form of the communication plan worksheet here, but this is all to show that many of our questions, many of the things that we're asking yield from the communication plan worksheet. They correspond directly. So for example, we ask early on in the communication and support section, what's the primary language used in the home? Is there a second language spoken in the home? Things that should be available to you in ECATS, in the communication plan worksheet, the IEP. Similarly, we ask in this section, what is student's current primary mode of communication or method to establish language? Here's sort of a retro paper screenshot again that would show sort of where these things are, but they're in the communication plan worksheet. And those, have those tools near you to enter these data. We ask about communication access support personnel at school, other related services they may have, all of which are available in the IEP. So have that information available. We also ask about secondary eligibility. Again, you should be able to find this in ECATS. Here's the old screenshot from the paper form. But any secondary area or areas of eligibility, if you could share those with us, there's a question for that. And click yes, and you can spell those out in the text box that's available to you. We're moving into the primary amplification and implantable devices section. And then there's a separate section for hearing assistive technology here. And we try to make that as clear as possible. So you will first be prompted to enter information about amplification technology, their primary amplification technology, including but not limited to hearing aids, cochlear implants, etc. So implantable devices. Their primary hearing technology is what we ask about first. Do they have these technology, yes or no? If you check yes and the student does, let's say wear hearing aids, then you'll be prompted to answer some questions about that. If they do not have any primary amplification or implantable devices, no, this section then would be skipped, okay? And here's just a reference to what it looked like in the communication plan worksheet. So all that information should be available to you if you don't know it offhand. We ask most of our hearing questions and technology related questions. We ask about each side, as we may have some students who have unilateral hearing losses versus bilateral hearing loss, students who may utilize a hearing aid in one side, a cochlear implant in the other, and so on and so forth. So we ask questions about their thresholds, technology, their type of hearing loss. We ask by side. So be prepared to answer questions that way. We have some qualitative questions as well, not very many, but some sort of pieced in throughout the survey. This is one related to their primary amplification. We ask broadly, how consistently does the student use his or her primary amplification or implantable devices during instruction in school? Consistently using that technology, inconsistently using it, or does not use it? So sort of broad questions, but we found that many teams have reported this has been very helpful to have, especially when you look back after all these data have been entered and you're looking through your screenshot of all the, your data sheet of all your data that's been entered. You can start to see patterns, especially in larger districts, of really some fundamental or foundational challenges potentially that are facing your students. And we like to think that if they have technology that is listed in their IEP that is to be used at school, if we have issues centered around they're inconsistently using that technology or they're not using that technology, fundamentally that's likely something that we should be addressing as a foundational focus, right? So this is something, one of those qualitative questions that really gets put back use for teams to see, okay, this is something that we can target that is sort of a fundamental challenge that we can address or hope to address, right? And so we have a few of these questions that have been really helpful for teams in identifying areas to potentially improve either for a particular student or sometimes, at a systems level, more at a school or district-wide. So after your primary hearing technology, we ask about HAT or hearing assisted technology in the next section. Again, do we ask, at the beginning, does this student use hearing assistive technology? Some examples of what that may be. If you say yes, they do, then we start getting questions about that technology. If you say no, then that section is skipped and you go on further into the survey, but we don't ask you those questions. So again, there's a lot of options as to what technologies these students use. Again, if something doesn't apply, there's something unique, you can put other and fill in the text box. Another somewhat qualitative section that we have found to be very helpful for teams, and this has been the focus for a number of different districts and improving the support these students have, has been centered around challenges and concerns that they've identified centered around the student's amplification and hearing assistive technology. So this section, we're asking about challenges and concerns with that technology. And it really asks about three areas or three different types of tech. It asks about hearing aids. It asks about cochlear implants and implantable devices. And it asks about hearing assistive technology. So you're only, of course, needing to answer questions that apply to that student, whatever technology they have. But this is something where you can let us know, okay, what challenges has this student faced with their technology? This gives you, when this data is sent back to you, you can really look overall and see, okay, what areas do we need to focus on to improve these challenges or concerns? And, we're asking you to report these things if they've lasted longer than 2 weeks during the school year. Figure that if it's been going longer than 2 weeks, it's something that is likely to be chronic or particularly an issue with them accessing and utilizing their tech. So we ask you to approximate how many weeks this issue has been going on with the cochlear implant, with the hearing aid, and or with the hearing assistive technology. So you can provide that. And we understand that it is an approximation. It's not something that you're tracking and keeping data on potentially. But approximately how long has this been an issue? And that gives you an idea of how chronic it is and really how pervasive that problem potentially has been over the course of that school year. Hearing info and audiological information, which is it's been, it's a bit shorter of a section than it used to be in previous years. We do ask about the type and degree of hearing loss. Initially we ask about type and we get to degree through their pure tone averages, which I'll talk about in a second. But we ask about the type of hearing loss per side again. If you're not sure the type of hearing loss they have, a box will pop up and ask, can you specify or just tell us more why the hearing loss has been undetermined? But for the majority of children, you should have the type, the etiology of the hearing loss, the type of hearing loss that they have per side. We ask if you have a copy of the student's audiogram, as an audiogram is required for any student to be eligible for DF or HI eligibility on their IEP. So you will likely need to have an audiogram with you when you're entering data coming up in subsequent questions here. But you also, we're also required to have an audiogram for these students who are receiving these services. So, we want you to have access to the most recent audiogram or hearing audiological report that you have to enter these data. But if since every student should have one, if you do not, you will get a prompt that asks, why don't you have a copy of the student's audiogram? And then you can, provide the reason why. When your team looks at your data, you can see, okay, what are some things that we can do to hopefully get a current audiogram on file? What has been the challenge in getting an audiogram for the student? So again, some areas that can help you sort of focus or address in the coming year for a particular student. So last year, we moved away from requiring you to enter a threshold, every threshold for a particular student. So we used to have you, have an audiogram in front of you and then enter all the thresholds across all the frequencies that the testing detected, so all the thresholds. And last year, for the first time, we moved away from that, which recognizing is cumbersome, and we did worry about potential for error in doing this for lots of students. It was data entry heavy, as I'm sure many of you have done this in the past remember. So now, to get a degree of hearing loss, we are asking for a pure tone average, and I'll talk about how we calculate that in a second. So you're no longer needed to enter the student's individual thresholds from the audiogram. The degree of hearing loss is provided by the PTA calculation, but you will need to have an audiogram on hand or an audiology report that states what their pure tone averages are, or both. So, don't disregard that you won't need to have an audiogram nearby. So if you're pulling documents or searching through ECATS, whatever it may be, you want an audiogram to be a part of the documentation that you have when you're entering these. So a quick overview on how to calculate pure tone averages. These exact instructions are located in the survey as well. So when you get to this page in the survey, you'll see some prompts just to remind you how we calculate the PTA, which frequencies you're looking at. But as a reminder, you're going to be calculating the student thresholds from the unaided audiogram. So we needed a standardized way across the state to get an idea of the degree of hearing loss for our students. And unaided reports that's the standardized format that we're using. We recognize that some students may have aided audiograms, some students may have who have cochlear implants may have audiograms with their CI thresholds on them, and those are really functional, beneficial things to have, especially in providing and working with that students and expectations of what they can access. But across the state, collecting these data to be able to report and understand their base hearing loss, we need to have information from the unaided audiogram. And I recognize that sometimes you may not have that information, especially for those CI kids. If you do, sometimes the pure tone averages are listed, even if they're not on the audiogram, but in the audiology report on that page or in a chart on that page. And you can just report those if they've already been calculated by the audiologist that did that testing. But if you do have an audiogram and the PTA hasn't been calculated or averaged for you already, you're going to be calculating the pure tone average from 4 frequencies, hopefully, but 3 frequencies at a minimum. And you're going to be looking at 500, 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000 hertz. You'll be calculating the thresholds, the average of those 4 thresholds per side. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second here. Now, if you don't have all of these frequencies, or if you're missing 4,000 particularly, you can calculate a 3 frequency pure tone average with 500, 1,000, and 2,000. And that's what's shown here, right? So you can't just choose 3 or 4 frequencies that have been tested. It has to be 500, 1,000, and 2,000 for a 3 frequency, or it has to be 500, 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000 for a 4 frequency pure tone average. And if you have 4, give us the 4. It's a bit more accurate in looking at their configuration. So again, don't calculate thresholds from an aided audiogram or an audiogram with cochlear implant thresholds, where the thresholds are marked with the C typically. And sometimes the PTA is reported outside of the audiogram in the audiology report or in the body of the text on that report. So take a look there if you can't calculate it from the audiogram. This example and example of calculations is shown inside of Qualtrics during the student survey. Quickly, refresher, X is going to refer to the left side, circles are going to refer to the right, typically is what you're going to see in an unaided audiogram. If this was in color, X's or the left side will be in blue, red for the right side. And we're really looking at, let's say, following this instruction over here, the right ear thresholds at 500, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000. So 500, we're at 45. All right. Oh, sorry, 45. So 500 around here, 45 at 1,000, thresholds at 55, at 2,000, thresholds at 65, at 4,000, thresholds at 70. And that's reflected right here We add those together, divide by 4, since we're 4 frequencies, and we get a right side pure tone average of 61. And that's the number that you'll report in the data collection. So just round up to a whole number. If it was, let's say, 60.5, just round up to the next number, 61 in this case. And you'll do that for left and for the right. This is what it actually looks like in the survey. So that's the same example. This is what it looks like in the Qualtrics survey. So this is there available to you next to the questions that's asking for you to calculate the right and left side PTA. If for some reason the audiology report only the better ear pure tone average is provided, which sometimes happens, you can click on I only have the better ear pure tone average for the student. When you click on that, a box will pop up and ask you to report that better ear pure tone average. Sometimes that might be available by itself in an audiology report, so you can provide that if that option occurs. We've got about 10 minutes here, and we're getting near the end, so I just wanted to show you what the assessment sections look like, and especially for vocabulary and language, the structure of these questions is very similar in how you move through these questions. It's pretty similar for reading as well, but reading has a little bit more nuances, so I share that next. But whether this was for vocabulary, as I show here, or for language, the first question you're going to get is, does this student have a vocabulary delay and or vocabulary goals on his or IEP? If vocabulary is something that is needing to be targeted, has been assessed, there's goals on their IEP, you're going to click yes, and it's going to then prompt to ask, well, okay, what sort of vocabulary assessment results do you have for this student? Do you have receptive measures? Do you have expressive vocabulary results? Do you have a composite score? And you can check all that apply that you have in front of you that you're able to report. You check those, and based on what you check here, it will open sections, then ask you then for the actual scores and some other information about the receptive, expressive, whatever you've checked. Now, if you've recognized that the student does have a vocabulary delay and or vocabulary goals on their IEP, you've said yes, but then you actually don't have any data or assessment results to respond, which would be curious. You would check, I don't have formal vocabulary assessment results. If you click on that, it's going to ask you, why don't you have vocabulary results? So why don't you have assessment data for a student that has a noted vocabulary delay and or goals on their IEP? So you'll get that one prompt. You won't have any questions beyond that, but you'll be looking for a reason as to why there's no assessment results in that area of need. And language will look the same. So here's your, if you said that there is this child has a language delay, we have receptive language results, assessment results to report, it would open up questions like this. So it's going to ask you to select which assessment tool you've given, and there's quite a robust list that I update each year based on previous responses of what test you gave. And so if it's not listed, you can put it in the other, but I hope that generally most of the major assessment tools that we use in the state are going to be shown in these questions. We'll ask you what date this assessment was provided on. We'll ask you for the receptive language raw score. It'll ask you for the standard score or scaled score, and it'll ask you for the percentile rank. Someone asked earlier about they may not have the raw score available to them. They may not have the percentile rank available to them, but if they have the standard score, are they able to just report that? And yes, so please report what you have. You might have to do a little bit of digging sometimes, but we need at a minimum at least the standard or scaled score. A raw score by itself typically doesn't provide a lot of helpful information, but if you have all three of those, that is helpful. But you will be prompted if you try to move beyond this section without providing a standard score. It's going to let you know you need to put in some sort of standard score here. So that is critical information in understanding those results. So please make sure you at least have the standard score, if not everything. There are a couple questions or two short sections, one on language tools and the other on similarly like literacy tools that you may be using. So in language tools, we're asking if there's any informal language tools that you're using to monitor the student's progress, guide intervention, and so on and so forth. And I think we just have 2, maybe 3 questions about that. So we're just curious as to what tools you're using, and also that you can sort of look across your district and see what tools have been used for these students. And that also, I think, often generates, you know, some discussion dialogue on what's worked well, what might be able to be incorporated for another student, and so on and so forth. So hopefully information that's helpful to you all in seeing as a summary. Jumping into reading assessment and tools. This is one of those qualitative questions. This kind of a broad question regarding overall reading ability. Would you say the student is mostly below, at, or above reading benchmarks? This is not, reading benchmarks don't apply. You'll be clicking on this issue here. But again, this is one of those things, as you look back at your district's data, you can sort of see a pattern as to sort of where they are in reading benchmarks, and get a sense of, what supports might be provided or where your students are broadly in reading. We do ask specifically about reading assessment information. So we have a section on school administered reading assessment. We ask, typically this is going to be done near the end of the year for many students. So you may either start entering data for the student and then come back and enter these, or you may be entering most of your data near the end of the school year. But we want the current year, the most recent reading assessment information, both school administered and any other reading assessment that you've done. So this section, if you have those results, press yes. It's going to ask you which areas. If you don't, we'd just be surprised, that if it's a school-age child with some reading assessment, they should have some sort of information. It might ask you why you do not have that information. Again, you're going to follow some of the same protocols as to answering raw score. If there's a standard score, scaled score, I know reading results can vary broadly by what reading assessment was given. So there's a bit more leeway in this section as to what you can enter in these boxes. For our K-3 reading, again, there's a place for you to enter this reading assessment information for these students done near the end of the year. So enter the most recent K-3 reading information for the students that applies. If you or your team have administered any other reading assessments, something like the Woodcock-Johnson or the Gray Oral Reading Test, you are able to share those in this section if there's any additional or supplementary reading assessments that you've used to track the students' progress or their current level of performance. Here's the section after the reading assessment, asking about what literacy tools and programs you're utilizing for your student that has a noted literacy delay and or literacy goals on their IEP. Well, just with a couple minutes, we're about at the end here. There are 2 open-ended questions that close the survey for every student, and they're the same questions. Every student, you'll get prompted for these. And these are open-ended. The first one is, do you have concerns regarding the validity of any of the assessments or results reported for this student? So this, if you do, then you can briefly share what those concerns are. There may be something unique to the testing that year, something unique to the child that may impact how the student performed on those assessments. You can share that here so we have that context, so that you also have that context to talk about with your team. And even outside of the validity of any of the assessments, if there's anything else that you feel is pertinent or you would like to share about this student over the course of this year, there's also the last prompt question that allows you to do that. So you have these 2 options to provide more context, color, qualitative information about that student this year if you would like to. And we encourage that. We have lots of individuals that do that, and it really does provide sort of a holistic look with all the other information that you've provided to us and to your team as well. Once you've answered that, and if everything has been entered for a student and all the teammates, or you've entered all the information for a particular student and you're ready to close it, you'll get this screen. You'll be able to click survey completed. It'll close the survey link. It'll basically jump back to the front of the table of contents and to verify, are you sure you're ready to submit and close the survey? If yes, you can finalize it by clicking here, and then that will close, submit the survey into Qualtrics. I have access to it at that point. Again, if anything changes, you need to make any additions, any edits, some new information has come to light, you recognize that you've made an error, email me. I will open that survey up for you with a new link. All your information is still saved in there, and you can make any changes or additions that you would like to do. The final thing you will see once you submit a survey is you have an option to download a PDF of all the questions that you've answered for that student. I highly recommend, strongly recommend that you do download and save a copy of that PDF electronically. Maybe make a repository so you have all your students' data, the individual PDFs. If you need to go back and look at the data you've entered, you want to check on anything, you want to use that as the resource, then you have those. We haven't had issues really with data being lost or things that have been entered not being submitted. But if you have a PDF that you've downloaded, that's something that you can always refer back to, or we could check to make sure things have got in the way that you've entered them. So please go ahead and download and save those PDFs as you enter them. They can only be helpful. And I think that's largely it. Here's contact information for us and our team. Again, links are going to be sent out to LEAs starting Monday, March 25th. That goes throughout the week. It takes a long time to generate all those for every district. They're all bespoke or tailored to your district and to students, so it takes some time to do that. Our final due date again is Friday, July 12th. So all these data from the end of March into mid-July, you have that time to enter information for your students. And in the meantime, don't hesitate to reach out to me or our team for any support that you need or questions that you have. And if there are any questions, Nancy, that I can address in these last few minutes as we go just a bit over, I'm happy to do so.
Sure. One question, I think it was when you were on the vocabulary and language assessments, but it says how recent do the assessments need to be, or do they just need to be from this school year?
So we would like you to enter the most recent information that you have. We hope that in many of these areas you're assessing these domains, vocabulary, language, within a year's time. We recognize that sometimes it'll be outside of a year. So even if it was something, let's say, that was assessed at the end of last year, and if you've already even reported it last year, we still want you to report the most recent data that you have. So if you reported vocabulary results last year that were done, let's say in March, and that's the last testing you've done in vocabulary for that student, we do need you to report those again this year's data collection, even though it was last March's assessment data. We don't really have a good way to keep assessment data and results year to year within the survey, because so many things change, students move, graduate, updates to the system. We can't keep data within the survey tool itself, so we need you to provide sometimes duplicate information if the same testing results is what's the most current, if that makes sense.
Okay. I had one other question. Not exactly sure what she's asking, and it's more of an audiologist specific, so I might answer that one offline.
Okay, and you can share that with me, or I'm happy to answer any email as well.
Additional question: after the data has been collected, is it reported back to the LEA?
Yes, that's what we've done in the past. We provide usually two, I wouldn't say options. There's two ways that we report these data back. If your district is, typically if you have 15 students or more in these data collection, that gets to a number of 15 or higher, we can start to summarize some of the, your results or some of the data that you provided. So if you have 15 or more students, we've used that as a threshold to send you a link in Qualtrics that basically shows you descriptive statistics of how you've answered questions. So, how many students do you have with current audiograms? Where are all your students typically scoring on receptive language? Those sorts of things. Those statistics can be summarized and sent to you, but you have to have usually about 15 students or more, of course. You have to have at least 15 students to be able to really summarize. When you get less than that, the summaries aren't all that helpful, and you're better off just looking at your data sheets. So that's one way. So if you have 15 more students, we send you a link in Qualtrics. Generally, this happens a couple months after, like into the fall, so that we have time to organize, put all these together, verify that all the data looks right and is organized, and then we can send these things back to you. But the other way is, as we have sent, sometimes as requested now, all the data you've entered in a spreadsheet back to your lead, so that you have all of your data in one place. It's in an Excel sheet, and that's that point. So we export it into an Excel sheet, and you have everything that you've answered for all your students on one Excel worksheet. And again, this is usually a couple months into the fall. It takes some time to put these together and verify that everything looks right and worked okay.
Okay, I don't see any additional questions.
Well, thanks so much for attending. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions, concerns, challenges, either today or as you are entering and submitting these data. We're here to help, and really do thank you for not only your time here today, but of all the work that you do to make this data collection robust and really useful to all parties involved. So thanks so much.